So first things first, Leah, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, all good.
Very good to hear. Now, before we get into Afraid of Tomorrows and talk about what you've been up to lately, I would like to jump back to the beginning. Now, do you remember when you first started putting words to paper?
Yeah, I do actually. I was really into writing when I was a kid. Um, I read quite a lot and I was obsessed with like Roald Dahl. He was like one of my favorite authors as a kid and I was pretty inspired by him. So I'd write like short stories and
Okay,
poems all the time and stuff. So yeah. And then I started getting into like writing competitions when I was in primary school and like
okay.
poetry competitions. So yeah, I think that was probably my first natural inclination before music. I think like the writing came first, really. Writing and like reading books came before me
Mhm.
like wanting to play an instrument or be on stage or anything.
And very quickly, because I'm sure you were a different person back then, but what did you write about?
I, they were just like short stories like a kid would write. I think I was definitely like naturally inclined to write a lot about ghosts and stuff and like haunted houses, which I suppose isn't too different from where I am now. But um I think I don't know, I remember I got there was a poem that I did as a kid which like won this like poetry competition and I got this like signed book by Spike Milligan, which I was like made up about. Um and that was about uh the River Mersey. So
Okay. Okay, but it's cool that that you mentioned there was already somewhat of a sinister undertone in some of those writings, which is very interesting compared to what you do now, as you say, which
Mhm.
we get into in a minute. But when did music start to play a role then? Well, did that kind of come together at some point, music and kind of that desire to write?
I've always been surrounded by music growing up. Um, I think it's just kind of, I'd say like a passage of right if you like growing up in Liverpool, especially.
Sure.
A lot of everyone's parents, grew up with music or they know someone in bands, and I, I suppose it's something that's like frequented quite a lot here, so it's naturally just going to happen. So it's always been a really huge part of my life. As a kid growing up, my dad was a musician as well. So I think, yeah, I'm not really sure when I kind of decided to do both simultaneously. I think probably just watching my dad do it and then just wanting to kind of copy him, maybe, um, or at least emulate what he was doing because I thought
Mm.
it was cool. And I guess I got like into people like Paul Simon and Bob Dylan pretty early on as a kid.
Okay.
So um I just kind of loved how not only did the words paint a picture for what they were doing, but the music kind of followed. So I think I just wanted to attempt to do that. And yeah, I'm still attempting to do that now.
Well, I was gonna ask because when you're younger, you're still in those formative years, and then you have to kind of figure out your own tastes and your own direction within that creative output. So do you feel like you found it now, or do you feel like you're on kind of the right track, so to say?
I think the thing with music and also just being a creative in general for everyone, I'm not really sure when you feel like you are on the right track.
Mm,
And I'm not sure if you should also feel that way too. I think the whole journey of like being the creative is kind of like the discovery of what will come next and also not knowing that. And I kind of always see stuff like music as like breaking like doors down to get to the next one, and then you don't know which door is gonna like lead where, but you just kind of pick and choose like you're channeling something almost. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'll ever feel like I'm on, the right track with relevancy to what, I'm listening to and stuff, but I think that's kind of the juxtaposition that most artists should probably seek for, really.
Hmm. That's a very interesting view because with that in mind, then how do you look back at the debut album? Is that all already a kind of a world apart from where you are now?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I don't really relate to it anymore because a lot of it was written when I was like 17, 18,
Sure.
some of them go back to when I was like 14, some of those songs. Um, which in a way I think I kind of look back on it now with a bit more of a positive attitude because I kind of, we spent a long time like hating that record
Hmm.
because we adored it so much and we couldn't release it for so long.
Sure.
And I think by the time it got released, we were already pretty sick of it. So I spent a long time like speaking really negatively about it, and I'm trying not to do that anymore because I think the naivety of it and the kind of visceral like nature to it is kind of exactly what was right at the time. And of course, that wouldn't be right now because that's not who I am anymore, and or who the band is. So, um, yeah, I guess I look back on it in terms of it's just like another reflection of a time.
I think you need those kind of moments, or whatever you make creatively, you need that to get to the next point, I suppose. So, well, the one quick question about the debut album then, because at the time, were you surprised by its success?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, and honestly, I don't really remember like a lot of it. I think it was just kind of like it's the first time you've done something, all I wanted to do was kind of like put it out, play it, hope people liked it, and also kind of discover something within me by releasing it, I suppose, or like,
Mm,
that was kind of what I was focused on. And also, I mean, I guess it was quite overwhelming in a way. I remember like doing the in stores and kind of being pretty shocked, but also kind of, surprised that people actually turned up and stuff. And I think I just enjoyed talking to people about, or at least, if they wanted to talk about what the record meant to them and stuff. And I guess that was kind of where I found a success of some sort. Um, but honestly, I can't really remember. And I think like um the way I think about success and the way it's like defined externally is like it doesn't really match up for me in my head. So
mm.
I guess, success is like if I've made something I'm proud of and I'm still able to kind of connect to it in some way. And I think with reeling, maybe that didn't happen, but that's because it was being written when I was so young. And
Mm.
uh I think that becomes easier like the more records you release. So um yeah, I can't even remember what the question was.
That's fine. Uh, that sharing aspect, and especially because you do put some of your personal thoughts in the music, and there is some real life being talked about. What was that sharing aspect initially as you were starting to write songs and kind of showing them to other people? And then, like you mentioned now, the fact that there are people listening and there are people finding something, it resonating with people. What did that do to you, and did that affect your songwriting at all?
No, I don't think I would. I was gonna say I don't think I'd ever think about other people then. But no, I don't think it's important or it was important for me then or with the new record to have discussed or like other people's feelings, I think. I think with like Reeling, it was more like narrative based, and it was kind of all, it was almost like I was playing on like a cliche of like the devil and like kind of like darker stuff,
Mm.
but it was in a way like it was kind of meant to be that literal. And I suppose there are songs on Reeling which were pretty personal and stuff, but not as personal as the new record. Um, and I suppose like writing personal songs is kind of like I always see it as like a divination like practice almost. Like sometimes you don't really know what you're writing, and sometimes you do. And yeah, I suppose there's like I feel like sometimes like the songs like stuck in like places, and like the only way to get it out is like write it. And usually after I've like written something, I feel better about whatever it was I was writing about, and I can like feel it like actually be like released. Uh, it's gone quite holistic now,
No,
but
but oh, sorry.
yeah, it does kind of make sense to me in a way. And I think the only choice I had for Afraid of Tomorrow's was to be pretty personal, and it wasn't even like a conscious thing. It just happened.
But with what you just now mentioned, am I right in saying that another is a good example of that, where you kind of needed to get that out and kind of
Mhm.
purge those feelings or emotions?
Yeah, that's the the exact song I was thinking about.
Okay.
Um, yeah, when I remember like writing that, and it was definitely like a release of like some sort. Um, and I still get that we've started playing that song live recently, and it's almost like I can put the emotion in the song like away in the song, like it sits there now as like a time capsule for the circumstances I wrote it under.
Sure.
But I think like the power of it is like it still kind of comes alive in me when we play it live, but like it doesn't like hurt anymore, I think is the right way to put
Mm.
it. Um yeah, that song is definitely one of those therapeutic ones, I suppose.
If you don't want to get into it, that's perfectly fine. But and you don't have to get into details. But what were the circumstances under which you wrote that particular song? And is that kind of typical for the times when you write? Are there specific times that you write? Are you very? Do you need life experiences to write and all of that?
I think with Afraid of Tomorrows especially, um I probably like tapped into trying to push myself like so far and put myself in a certain state to be able to like channel these things that I felt were like stuck
Mm.
inside of me, which obviously over time becomes quite I think hard to keep up with, and also there's no longevity in that creatively. And I
Mm.
suppose it also like other people's like relationships around you kind of collapse too, because you become so isolated in the process of writing. It's almost like you become the record.
Mm.
Um, and there's lots of themes throughout the record of like paranoia, like hallucinations. There's a running theme of like time and clocks and stuff.
Sure.
Um, which is something I suppose links to the title of the record. And yeah, I think it all kind of ties in, and the circumstances that that song Another was specifically written under are very similar to kind of how they were all written under. Um, and yeah, it was a pretty grueling process at times, but one that I kind of felt resonated with me at a time and allowed me to get out what I needed to say. Um,
Mm.
but I definitely kind of became the record for a bit, and yeah, that was pretty interesting.
Uh, that sounds very interesting because I can imagine that when you work on songs that much and you fully invested, then well, for instance, a song like the first song on the track, "The Last Dance," do you then become as you're involved with that song, do you then become more lonely, or do you feel yourself being more separated from the world in a sense?
Yeah, I think so, but it's kind of like I think that's just kind of how I felt throughout the record. Like there's a lot of like isolation
Right.
in the record. Lots of kind of like themes of loneliness and like what loneliness can do to people and how not only just how it makes you feel, but who you become and kind of what you then seek for. So I guess with The Last Dance, it was kind of like an extended metaphor because it's about like someone falling in love with a porcelain mannequin
Mm.
and I'm wishing that it would be able to dance with it because they want it to be alive. But it's kind of like about like so it's like a metaphor for like seeking to find life in things that are never gonna give you that and are only gonna isolate you more because
Mm.
it's, um inauthentic, I suppose. Um and I guess the repeated line on the chorus with "If only you'll take my hand" is about the mannequin wanting to be alive, but also about like a kind of like a cry for help for people who are around the character to be like, if only like you could step in and help, I suppose. So there's a lot of like double meanings in that song, and I guess it is just like that's probably the pinnacle of like loneliness with the song because there's a lot of like hallucinations throughout it. It's kind of like
Sure.
so I suppose it is quite narrative based too, but the emotions like are pretty like pure in it.
Well, one last thing about songwriting then, or your writing style, because you mentioned Roald Dahl as an influence early on. Who do you look towards more recently, let's say in the last couple of years, in terms of writing and in terms of because Bob Dylan, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan as well. He has that narrative style, but also has that confessional style of writing. Um, for you then, what do you look towards for inspiration? But also, how have you found you can use words to express yourself the best, if that makes sense?
I mean, I've got so many writing influences now. Leonard Cohen's a huge one for me. You know, not just his music, but his like poetry books and his novels. Um, yeah, like he kind of does what like Dylan does in a way, but I suppose there's always like I don't know if Dylan ever goes as dark as Leonard
Mm,
Cohen does, you know. I think Dylan kind of remains like more based on emotion, but like Leonard Cohen will just kind of like hit you with something that's like quite bizarre. And yeah, I love that. Um, I suppose like even like films and stuff are a huge inspiration for writing, and David Lynch is obviously a
mm,
huge um inspiration of mine and stuff, and I adore like everything he does. Um, Mark Linkous from Sparklehorse is also a huge inspiration and was for the record too.
mm,
Um, I guess I suppose like writers for this record anyway that I was like reading and listening to and films I was watching was kind of all pretty like otherworldly and almost like whimsical in
Okay.
some ways. Um, which kind of helped me hone in on just like descriptive writing and like kind of like making um relying on imagery more to kind of
Mm,
discuss how I feel rather than saying how I feel, which I found really fun to do with writing this record and kind of like making the atmosphere of the song based around what images I was kind of describing. So,
sure.
I mean, people like Sparkle Horse, the Motley Kiss do
Mm,
that often, and yeah, I think I found like it was almost like I was like building a world for the record to live in rather than like making a record how I like remembered doing it the first time. Um, so yeah, I think that's why it became pretty overwhelming. I kind of got stuck in the world of the record for a bit, but um, yeah, it was a fun process, and I loved writing the words for it and music.
Was it easy to get out of that world then once the album was finished, or was that even making that decision? Well, now I'm not gonna touch it anymore. Was that even a tricky one?
I think before we went to record it, I'd made a choice to kind of try and step away from it because it didn't really stop. Even though it was like written, I wouldn't kind of come out of it, and I was still kind of writing
Mm,
for it, or almost like writing from it, like from the world. And I was kind of yeah. Um, but yeah, when I went to record it, I think I kind of chose to maybe step out of it a bit, but I think having to revisit the meanings of the songs again and then break them down again, and it kind of just um came back, I think. But I suppose that means it's like honest for me and like real. And I think if it
mm,
didn't come back in a way, then it would have became almost fictional.
right.
So um it was hard to kind of step out of the world of the record for a bit, and I found it difficult to actually listen to it for a while. Um, but I'm okay now. I think I've got out.
So in the beginning, you kind of mentioned you wanted to convey emotion and kind of the feeling of these songs through words, but also through the sonic landscape and the sonic palette that you use. So let's get into that a little bit more. When did you, or what was the approach for this album from the band? Because I imagine the palette kind of got broadened in a way.
Mhm. When we started, well, I think we didn't actually know when we started writing it because it kind of just we started listening to more stuff, and then like we were just kind of like playing new things together. Um, but the processes of like creating it, I found that I wanted to like leave and go away for a bit to kind of desolate countryside areas. So me and Paul would go away and do demos. I think we go for like 4 days maybe. I think the most we went away for was like nearly a week
Mhm.
because it is difficult to be in the middle of nowhere for so long when it's just like you two creating stuff together.
Sure.
Um, so we went. I think the first place we went to was like a caravan and like on this farm, and then we I think we did Hawk Moon there. That was one of the first ones
Mhm.
that was
Okay.
written actually. And we did Begin Again there, even though it's not on the record. And we did, I think, some of the ones that aren't on the record. The next place we went to was like this like abandoned like barn. And then we wrote Afraid of Tomorrow's there. And I think the rest of it, we were the rest we wrote there haven't made the record. But I kind of like loved the way we had to go to like a barn to write Afraid of Tomorrows because of the sound of it. Um, but it's like when we went to these places, we didn't know we were gonna write these songs. It was just
Okay.
I just wanted to get away and kind of see what happened and kind of dedicate like 4 or 5 days nonstop to just kind of trying to like channel things.
Mm.
And then the last trip we went on was a little bit more relaxed as opposed to the others. And I think we did like So Long There, Sink Your Teeth, and some others that haven't made the record. So I suppose like within the writing process, there was like two would have made the record, and then the rest of them wouldn't have made it. And
Mm.
there were so many songs that was written for this album. Um, yeah, and once we got the demos, we just redid them sort of a little bit with the boys, the Callum and George. Um, yeah, and then we just took them to John Congleton and just did it all again. So it was a pretty like long process. I think the demoing one was especially like pretty intense sometimes. So I think um but yeah, in a way that's kind of what I wanted to do to build that world in a really strong
Mm.
way before we presented it to a producer to like, I didn't want it to be interpreted wrong by any means. I wanted to kind of build the foundations really strong so that we kind of went in with like a body of work as opposed to something that was kind of like half finished.
Mm. Is there one? If there isn't, that's fine, and I'll just cut it out. But is there one memory of something strange, something special, something just something that sticks out in your memory of those trips? Maybe a crazy night, maybe just a crazy one of those flashbulb moments when just an idea hit you or something. Was there anything on those trips?
On when we did Hawk Moon, um, that was like a really like spooky night. There was like
Okay.
something there was something like happen. I don't know what it was, but there was definitely like something going on like in the atmosphere. I'm not sure. It could have been that we were like literally in a caravan in the middle of nowhere and there was like mountains like by us and stuff, but it went so dark at night like around there. And when we were demoing Hawkmoon, and I mean it must have been about like I don't know, like 1 a.m. It wasn't too late, but it was still late enough for it to be dark. And then we were demoing it, and this like light was coming through the caravan, and I just assumed it was like a floodlight or something. And went outside for a smoke, and it was the moon. It was like so huge, and I was like, so weird because like we're doing Hawk Moon, and
Hmm.
we like Googled why the moon was that big, and it was I can't remember what moon it was called, but it was just like huge. And then it like I can't remember what it like changed like shape or something. And then it just like disappeared after we finished doing the song. And it was just a bit like, I don't know, there was some sort of like weird synergy going on there. But yeah, that I remember that moment. That was pretty special. And I think it kind of had a good knock-on effect because it was the first
Right.
Halloween thing we did. So it kind of just felt magical.
Yeah, I think, and it's a very interesting song as well, especially the kind of the way it works towards that moment where gets released. Sonically, you mentioned earlier you don't you don't think about other people when working on music, but uh, did this album at points feel like taking risks here and there musically or sonically or anything? And what role did John play in that process?
I mean, to be honest, I don't really see it as taking a risk because I think it's something that should happen.
Hmm.
And I think with every record, people do the things people call risks are the things that make your album and make you a better artist. And I think if you're able to make choices that kind of surprise yourself or challenge yourself, then and be able to stick with them and execute them well, then I think, you're pushing yourself to be better and to create more. And I think that's kind of what was the thought process around the music and the writing, especially was to kind of make opposite choices to what, I felt natural to me. And I remember saying that to John Congleton. I was like, I've chose to do anything that I think I should do. I've chose the opposite and then seeing where that's led me. And sometimes
Mm,
sometimes your gut instinct is the right one to have. But it sometimes the opposite choice is kind of almost as interesting and it, if not, feels better. So we kind of did that a lot, or at least I did that. And I think it was kind of annoying people a little bit sometimes because it became quite trivial at the end. But
mm.
John backed that process and he pushed us to, and creatively, I think he just gave us the confidence to back a choice. Like he was like, if you want to make a choice like this, you're gonna have to be able to back it up and like execute it well and it's an artistic choice rather than like, oh, this sounds good or like this works, so we should keep it, or this is like fine, it fits. It's like, well, no, we don't want to just go with what's like fine.
Sure.
And I think he was a great supporter and creator in that process. And yeah, he was just great to work with, like such a interesting, creative, and I'm like a huge fan of his like music too. So for me, it was just like a huge honor to work with John.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've been doing this job for 10 years and his name literally pops up almost every week. He's done something for somebody on some album. It's really cool how much he's done. I have one last question because you kind of mentioned success and what the definition of that is. And I remember, and I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I think Paul said in an interview that one of the aims or the goals, the ideal would be that people would be still would be listening in about 10 years. And now we know the way the musical landscape and the consumption of music operates today, how quickly it goes. How do you see kind of the musical landscape? Because I do feel like what you do in a way, it's also a little bit going back to that band culture that it isn't always as prevalent anymore. So how do you see kind of the future of the musical landscape?
I think things change and everything comes in cycles. And I think the future of the musical landscape is that I just hope that people are still willing and want to and passionate about creating stuff that means something to them or means something to their band or like I think if we lose that then we're pretty fucked because you know what's the point otherwise.
Hmm.
um and I think art and like music it is like it's like basis is about connection and whether that's with each other or with yourself or the outside world. Again, if we lose that, we're fucked. But I'm not really sure if we ever will lose that because people want that and they seek for that in so many different ways in
Sure.
life, you know. And I think without music or film or books or art, then we wouldn't have been able to discover as much about the human nature and like emotion. So I think the future of the musical landscape is just that it will still exist, and I hope it does, and I hope people still care enough to write their own music, and whether it's music I like or not, that's got
Hmm.
nothing to do with the future of it. I just want it to still be prevalent and um fruitful. So yeah,
All
that's
right.
the end of the sentence.
On that note, then, Liam, may I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much for having me.